Okay, welcome back. So we continue with the false paradigm model. Now, within the other approaches in international dependence theories, so this is less radical than the neocolonial dependence theory. Here we have the notion that countries remain underdeveloped or poor because their development policies or development strategies depend on a false paradigm, the incorrect model. Okay, so how can this be true? Well, imagine one thing. In the Hacettepe trade theory, remember Hacettepe theory? What do we know? We know that if you are a relatively more labor abundant country, or if you are a relatively more land abundant country, right, you should specialize more in land intensive or labor intensive goods. Okay. Conversely, if you have a large endowment of capital, if you are relatively more capital abundant, then you must specialize more in the capital intensive goods, right? Now, the idea is that most of the underdeveloped economies today are labor abundant. They are land abundant, okay? So their comparative advantage, according to the Hacettepe theory, lies in these land intensive or labor intensive goods. But the problem is this. These land intensive or labor intensive goods have low income elasticities. Okay, so if you want to sell these goods to the, according to theory, you sell these goods, of course, to capital abundant countries, right? So this is the famous north-south model. So if you are a country in the north, you have relatively more capital, you have relatively more skills, so that you specialize in capital-intensive goods, and these capital-intensive goods have higher income elasticities. But if you are in a poor country, these poor countries are usually characterized by land abundance and labor abundance, so they specialize in these labor-intensive or land-intensive goods, so they sell these goods to these high-income countries. But the problem is that, again, income elasticities of these goods are typically low, so they do not earn a lot by specializing in these land-intensive or labor-intensive goods. Plus, there is this bigger problem. If you specialize more in land-intensive or labor-intensive goods, then you do not have any incentive, any strong incentive to invest in technology, invest in human capital, invest in education, invest in health, right? Because if the main sector you specialize in is in agriculture or in mining or in, such labor-intensive goods, such as, let's say, clothing, then you have little scope for investing in education because you do not need that. For agriculture, if most of the people in your country will work in the production of crops, then you do not need artificial intelligence engineers. Okay, so if you approach your underdevelopment problem from the perspective of Hacettepe theory, then it is no good. All right, or remember the Solow model. In the Solow model, there is this long-run equilibrium, and in this long-run equilibrium, income per capita is basically depend on your investment rate and your population growth rate, right? So these are the typical main determinants of long-run income levels. And the idea is that if you invest more or if you save more, then you become richer in the long run. Or if you have lower population growth or lower fertility, then you again become richer. But the problem is that in poor countries, there is a saving shortage, right? Because these countries are already poor and they consume a lot just to meet the minimum standards of living. So typically, they have a need for external funds because they don't have enough savings. All right, that's one thing. The other thing is that if fertility is high, there is usually a set of structural reasons for that, right? Why would fertility high in a country? Well, because the time cost of fertility is low, for instance. All right, so incomes are low. If you spend your time in market, your wage income is lower than some benchmark level, for instance. Then the cost of fertility is low for you. If the cost of fertility is low, then if you want to have kids, then you have many kids. Or if mortality is high and you care about the number of surviving children, imagine that you are in, let's say, Ethiopia or Sudan, then the disease environment is bad, mortality is high, and if you want 2 kids for your family, if your ideal number of kids is 2, but mortality is, let's say, 50%, then you must have 4 kids, because 2 of them will not survive, and you will have 2 kids. So fertility is high because mortality is high. All right. So there are structural reasons, and if you blindly follow the Solow model and try to increase your savings, first of all, you cannot possibly do that because you are already poor, and since you are already poor, fertility is high, so you cannot easily decrease population growth rates. So the false paradigm model emphasizes these dimensions of development policy making. Okay, and of course, in such a model, if you are using that type of model that is not particularly designed for the structural problems of your country, then you may focus simply on liberal markets or free markets, deregulation, just capital accumulation, but not investing in knowledge and technology, etc. All right. Then in the long run, you may not be achieving the successes. All right. So it is important that these development, as I said it here, you need to give particular attention to social and institutional setup, and sometimes to geography as well. All right. So what is suitable for your country is very, very important. Okay. The third thing we are going to discuss is the dualistic development. Okay. Now we define duality as the coexistence of 2 situations or phenomena, one desirable and the other not, that are mutually exclusive to different groups of society. Let's compare these things. For instance, you have in a country extreme poverty and affluence. Some people in the country live good lives, higher standards of living, higher incomes, and some other section, which is possibly larger, are living in extreme poverty. You may have modern sectors and traditional sectors, as in, for instance, Lewis theory. Okay, you may have growth in some sectors in some regions. You have stagnation. You may have stagnation in some regions and in some sectors. Okay, you may have higher education among a few. Okay, possibly people, higher income people living in big cities, and then you have a large mass of uneducated or illiterate people. Okay. Now, there are a couple of arguments about these dualistic development thesis. One is that, again, superior and inferior conditions coexist. All right, as we discussed. The other is these are chronic. Okay, this is not a phenomenon that can change in time when you leave the market be. Okay, when you leave the economy, freely following a capitalist accumulation process, these chronic dualities will persist. They're not automatically resolved. Why? Because most of them depend on historical conditions, and historical conditions cannot easily change. Why? Because they depend on culture, they depend on institutions, etc. Okay, and those things persist. since culture does not easily change, since institutional setup, especially informal institutions, does not easily change, those dualities persist in time, and usually they increase in time. Okay, that's the argument 3. So if there's a mechanism that creates these dualities, since they persist in time, you're going to observe, for instance, increasing inequality between poor sections of the society and rich sections. You're going to have increasing wealth inequalities. You're going to have increasing land inequalities. All right, you're gonna observe increasing monopolization, for instance. Okay, so so as you see, the arguments are recursive. First, you have these coexistence of dualities. Then you have they're being chronic dualities, not easily change in time when you leave the market be. And then, of course, you're going to observe increasing underdevelopment outcomes, higher inequalities, etc. Right? And finally, so there is no trickle-down mechanism, because some economists believe that even if there is inequality now, if you let growth continue, then that growth eventually trickle down to other segments of the society, right? So they imagine a frictionless world, obviously, so that imagine that there is technological progress. Technological progress increases not only the capitalist's income, but also workers' income, because in an economy that experiences constant technological progress, eventually wages should be increasing. That's correct in theory, but in practice, we see, for instance, after 1980s, we see continuing increasing in technological progress or aggregate productivity measures, but we do not observe the same increase in real wages. Okay, as a result, people who are at the top percentiles of wealth distribution, their share of wealth increases in time. Okay, you may check the work of Thomas Piketty, for instance. He wrote a book called Capital. I think it's called Capital in the 21st Century. And of course, if you write a book about wealth inequalities, and if you put the name Capital in the title, then you sell a lot. There is this famous book by Karl Marx. It's also called Capital, right? All right, I'm concluding. First, as you see, dependency theorists reject the neoclassical theories, right? Because countries have different historical conditions, different colonial ties, different geographies, different cultures, different institutions. So first, there's exploitation. Second, there's dualistic development. And sometimes they are given the incorrect or false paradigms, incorrect development policy sets. Okay? The emphasis is on international power. Remember, in our political history class 4 years ago, we start talking about power, right? Now, power matters a lot, because if you are powerful, the bargaining outcomes are more favorable to you at the end, because in the markets there is always some bargaining. Okay, so reforms are basically blocked by these barriers. Okay, powerful agents, either in your country or in the center. Okay, if you are in a periphery country, And if you remain powerless, if you are not becoming a part of the local elites or the comprador groups, then you remain being exploited. Okay. Some very radical adherents to dependence theories, they suggest, of course, the total socialist revolution. Okay, so if there's global capitalism that exploits your workers, then as workers you should unite, obviously, and you should overthrow the system. You should overthrow the comprador groups, you should overthrow the military dictators, and you should overthrow other types of exploitative institutions to get what you own originally, right? And there are weaknesses, obviously. One is that there's no clear theory of how to initiate development. Okay, because the idea is of a trap, right? If you are a former colony, if there are very powerful comprador groups in your country, and if they live in good conditions and the large mass of people live in very bad conditions, you know, uneducated, not good health, etc., then this is a trap. Okay, how can you initiate in such a country under given constraints of global capitalism and global division of labor, you know, these extractive and exploitative relationships, if they persist, how you can change it? So there is no clear theory other than a socialist revolution. And then we also have the actual record of socialist economies or centrally planned economies that remain outside, you know, at least partially outside of this global capitalist system. For instance, we have countries such as North Korea, countries such as Cuba, and other historically socialist economies. And we observe that the situation in these countries were not that as good. Okay, in terms of living standards, in terms of education, in terms of health. Well, Cuba is an outlier in terms of health because they have this historically better state of health in general, but other than this, the actual record does not suggest, you know, socialist economies or centrally planned economies are certainly better in terms of development outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. This is all I suggest concerning the international dependence theories. But again, watch the video I just posted. This is a very short lecture by a political scientist, I guess, but it very clearly summarizes the idea of neocolonial dependence. And also read the article that I just posted again. It's about the world systems theory. And then now we have a lot of time to discuss your questions and comments. And of course, I will share this video lecture in a couple of days as well. Okay. The floor is yours. Nothing? Let me throw out a couple of examples. Think about this. The Ivory Coast, the country, Côte d'Ivoire, Türkçesiyle Fil Dişi Sahili, have the, I mean, this country has the best cocoa in the world. Okay. And the country has huge comparative advantage in cocoa because the climate and the soil is best suited for high quality cocoa production. Okay, cocoa beans, of course, not the cocoa powder, just beans. Imagine the cocoa trees. Now, in an imaginative world, you may expect the best chocolate in the world to be produced in Côte d'Ivoire, right? Because chocolate has this main ingredient, which is the cocoa powder and the cocoa liquor. All right? Cocoa butter or cocoa liquor. I mean, those things that you extract from cocoa beans. But Côte d'Ivoire does not have the best chocolate in the world. Okay? Now, you should ask why. Now, there are some technological reasons for that. There are some reasons about endowments, and there are some other reasons. There are some aspects of international political system and international economic system that basically forces, Côte d'Ivoire to export coffee beans to other countries that use that cocoa powder to produce the best chocolates in the world. I think Sinem will add something.
Yani sizin söylediklerini söyleyecektim. Gerekli teknolojiye de sahip olmadıkları için aynı zamanda biraz da piyasa malı üretme diye de bir nokta var ya. Yani o kakao ile işte likör yapması, daha farklı ürünler yapması. Biraz daha piyasaya dönük gelişmiş ülkelere kalıyor.
Okay, actually they produce cocoa powder as well. And I purchased a couple of packages. But this is only, I only saw this in the airport market. Okay, I didn't saw in a local market in Abidjan where they sell cocoa powder. Maybe that was my unlucky situation. Maybe there is a local market that sells cocoa powder as well. But most of the stuff is high quality export stuff, as a niche product. And they sell this in the airport, in the Abidjan airport. So you may also think about coffee. All right, the biggest coffee producers in the world are countries that lie on this coffee band. So there is this region of the world around closer to the equatorial line. Okay. And in these lands, the climate and the rainfall and the soil are best suited for coffee production. Okay, you may imagine Guatemala, Brazil, Ethiopia, Indonesia, etc. Right? So these countries. But again, the largest coffee exporter in the world is Switzerland, Nestle. Okay. How? Because they transform it and there is this huge value added. The espresso capsules. Okay. The espresso capsules are produced by a Swiss company, Nestle. Okay. And you should also think of other aspects of coffee production. If you are careful enough, look at the cover of the coffee brand, coffee package at your home. In some, if you purchase this coffee from a particular brand or a couple of particular brands, they say this coffee has fair trade certified. This coffee is fair trade certified. What does it mean? So there are certain places in the world where in the coffee production plantations, people live in extremely bad conditions. Why? Because there's extremely low wages. Okay, but in global, in the global market, companies such as Starbucks, Caribou, Gloria Jeans, those companies that they always put a fair trade certificate to their coffee. So they always go and work with local production plants that ensure some minimum level of standards, minimum level of living standards in that production plant, okay, or job safety standards, job security standards, etc. So the idea is that there's fair trade between the Starbucks company and the coffee producers in Guatemala. All right. So international political system, an international economic system with all the historical connections, institutional dependencies, and dualistic components, help powerful people in the center countries to exploit the powerless people in peripheral countries. So that's the general idea. But again, there is no magical development recipe produced by these theorists. They say, all right, go for a revolution. You don't have anything but your chains. Remember that. But the idea is that it is not that easy. Okay, it's not easy to organize as a huge working class and forget about everything you have, because as we know, workers of the world, unite. You don't have nothing but your chains is a very good slogan, but it is not entirely correct. People have stuff. I mean, they have their lives, because in a revolution, you may lose your life. In a revolution, with an armed conflict, you can lose your family. You can be convicted if you become unsuccessful at the end. All right? And there is social democracy. There are some degree of safety, some degree of security in the world, even though, of course, there is huge exploitation and extreme poverty. So all of this you should think about all together. And as a world system, how you can overcome the problems of neocolonial dependency, how you can overcome the problems of dualistic development, how you can overcome the problem of false paradigm. Okay? And sometimes socialist revolution is not the only way. Yeah, go ahead.
Bu Kalkınma Reçetelerinin Gerçek Yüzü diye bir kitap var. Harjon Kuçanlık galiba.
Çok iyi bir kitaptır, evet.
Evet.
Bir de onun bir de Bad Samaritans adlı bir kitabı var. O da iyidir.
Not alayım. Ne dediniz?
Bad Samaritans.
Tamamdır. Orada mesela bu aslında az gelişmiş ülkelerin gelişememe sebeplerinden biri de gelişmiş ülkelerin bu merdiven itme teorisiyle kendi uyguladıklarını, ama aslında sonradan o hale gelip de uyguladıkları, özellikle neoliberal politikaları gelişmemiş ülkelere dayattıklarından veya bu tarz reçeteler sunduğundan bahsediyorum mesela. Bu konu hakkında ne dersiniz diye soracağım. Ne düşünüyorsunuz daha doğrusu?
İşte that's entirely the idea of false paradigm. Okay, because historically they face different constraints. Okay, the constraints England faced in 18th century are entirely different by constraints faced by 21st century Uganda. Okay, because they live in different worlds. They have different trade relationships. They observe different patterns of capital movements across countries. there is this huge thing called intellectual capital, right? I mean, Apple phones are designed in California and assembled in China. All right, that was not the case when steam engines were used to produce, stuff in 18th century England. They produce the stuff there and they sell it to India, for instance. Okay. So yes, so Hajung Chang is an impressive guy. There are also other guys. I mean, I would recommend you to check it, take a look at Danny Roderick's stuff as well. Danny Roderick is a Turkish American economist. He's originally from Istanbul, and he's at Harvard. There's another guy, another Turkish, Timur Kuran. Timur Kuran also works specifically on Middle East economies. Okay, Malik has a question. Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between the modern world system and the world system in terms of where Wallerstein and Frank diverge? That's a very good question. I have no idea. Maybe you should check how can they diverge, and I also check, and next week we can discuss it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So we have less than 5. So you have your reading, you have the short video lecture you should watch, and then you're going to have our lecture slides and our video lecture. Next week, we're going to look at the Washington Consensus and the free market revolution. Okay? So we're going to understand this false paradigm given to many countries so that those recipes and those policy sets become the false paradigm of their development. Okay. Then we're going to continue with the modern theories in 2 weeks. Midterm exam is approaching. Don't forget that. I think it is in the 7th or the 8th week. Again, you will have 24 hours or something like that to complete the exam. All right. So don't imagine that it will be like a week, so you will have enough time. No, you will have restricted amount of time, and you're going to complete the exam and submit in time. No mercy for late submitters. Okay, even if you submitted 1 minute late, I cannot accept it. Okay, because the system tells me exactly when you submitted. Okay, so there is no exception to this rule. You will have enough time. Just use that time and submit in time. All right. There's one question. Yes, all of them will be online. The midterm exam and the final exam will be online. I will upload it at a particular time. You will know that time. After I upload it, you're gonna work on this, and in less than 24 hours, you're gonna submit your answers as a Word or a PDF file. Okay. All right then. Thanks so much for showing up. Next week, we're gonna work on the free market revolution, section 3.5, I guess, in your textbook, and you will have the readings and you will have the video lectures again. And that's it for today. If you have no more inputs. Tamamdır. Bye bye then.
Okay. Bye bye.